Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is October 31st, 2017, and I'm interviewing Susan Donavant as she comes up on her retirement from the college after almost 40 years, or maybe slightly more than 40 years of working at the college. She's retiring as Executive Director of Alumni Relations. So Susan, welcome, and first I want to congratulate you on your retirement.
Thank you.
And as you look forward to retiring at the end of the year, we wanted to take a few minutes for you to look back at your time at the college. So first, why don't you tell us how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon College?
Okay. I have actually been hired 3 times by the college. The first time was in 1974 as the first director of annual giving. I was here for 5 months, and then I married my husband, Mike, and his work took us to North Carolina. So after those 5 months, they had to find someone else at that point. Henry Carter was the head of the department, and he was absolutely wonderful. He was a member of the class in 1953. And at the time, the person who was treasurer was known as Captain Don Reed. I'd served in the Navy, and his secretary was Grace Moss, who was an absolutely wonderful lady. She had 2 Irish setters that I remember were basically with her most of the time in the business office behind the main desk, but very, very well behaved. And I also remember the first time I went down to get some supplies from Grace. At that time, I had a small blue plastic Smith Corona typewriter that I was using. This was long before the advent of computers. And so I had to use carbon paper in order to make copies of things for files. And I remember going down to see Grace, who had the supplies, and when I said I would like some carbon paper, I was expecting her to give me a box of carbon paper. And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, "How many sheets do you want?"
Oh, my goodness.
At which point I said, "May I have 5?" And she said, "Yes." And she very slowly counted out 5 sheets and gave them to me. So I was learning very quickly that this is something where we all need to be very fiscally responsible at Randolph-Macon and just ask for exactly what we need within a short period of time and not thinking long term.
I hope she didn't make you reuse the carbon paper.
We actually used it a number of times.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then when you were hired the second time, how long did you stay at that point?
Yes. The first time was the 5 months, and then with Mike's and our marriage taking us away, a year went by and they had not filled the position. And so I contacted the person who was head of the department, and I asked whether or not they would like for me to run the phonathons on a 3-month contract, because I could come up from North Carolina in order to do that. And they said yes. And so for 3 months, in 1975, came up and managed the phonathons that they were having. After that time, it was, I guess, maybe just a short time later, Mike and I moved back to the Richmond area, but by that time they had filled the position that I had, and so I went back to work at the University of Richmond. And then in 1979, that's when I was contacted by Randolph-Macon to see if I would come back and become the head of the Alumni Relations Department, and I agreed.
And you've been here
And I've been here ever since 79.
Okay, wonderful. Great.
Yes.
Well, tell us a little bit about the phonathon. What was that like?
Well, when we started out, we didn't have phones on campus. So we went down to the C&P building on West Broad Street. We had an alumnus, Fritz Palmer, class of 39, who worked there, and he was able to get us in to use rooms on occasion that had telephone banks, and we'd bring the alumni down there, and we'd have like 25 or 30 of them in an evening doing phonathons for the annual fund.
And that must have been successful if they kept doing
It was.
Yeah.
That was also at a time where we didn't have computers to flash, the latest results of the phonathon. So we ran a paper strip across the ceiling, and we had it marked off $100, $200, $300, and so until we got to 1,000. And we used a little cutout of a yellow jacket to sort of move it along as the totals kept going up. And then after we'd reach 1,000, then we put up a new marker on the low end of 1,000 and go to 2,000.
Right.
And that's how we ran them. And they were a lot of fun, and we had great people participating in them.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
It
very,
was.
very hands-on.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I believe you were the college's first director of annual giving. Is that correct, that title?
It was, and that was that 1974 time period.
Can you talk about the college's outreach to alumni over the years and your role working with the alumni in that capacity?
Well, one of the things when I was here the first time was the fact that the college really needed funds. And so one of the things that was done was a play was created for us to take on the road using students. It was called The Wizard of Odds, ODDS. In other words, what were the odds of Dorothy finding the wizard who could provide her with a scholarship to Randolph-Macon?
Oh.
We've got some great pictures. In fact, I've actually just mailed them out recently to the cast as sort of a little parting reminder of what they had done back in '74. But it was a great time to be out and visible for the college with the alumni and telling them the message that, they had people who had actually supported them, so their tuition wasn't as high as it could have been, and to think about doing the same thing for the current Randolph-Macon students.
Well, that must have been a lot of fun.
It was an awful lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was great.
Good.
We played in 6 cities in Virginia and up in Baltimore.
Did you ever do that again, or was that just that
No,
one
it
year?
was a one-time. It was a one-time event.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot. I'm glad you got pictures of that.
Yes.
I'll have to look for those.
Okay.
Well, besides the phone-a-thon, you mentioned the play. Were there any other strategies you and the office developed?
Well, at that time, we also, of course, were doing mailings.
Yeah.
And mailings at that time were very hands-on.
Yeah.
We didn't have all the electronic equipment. I remember doing one mailing with the great help of James Henry, who ran the print shop.
Yes.
And what I wanted to do was have a mailing touting the need for the annual fund, and superimpose the text on a large yellow jacket that would be on the stationery. And what it meant was that James would have to do a double run of the mailing. And so what he did was he created the yellow jacket and did that in yellow on the paper for the first run. And then the second run, he ran the yellow jacket over in black to show the black and yellow separation. And then we printed the letter on top of that. And it
Wow.
fit right into the silhouette of the yellow jacket.
Wow. And before all this graphic design software, that was really quite a feat.
Well, it was
Yeah.
a challenge because I am not an artist.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And the thing I also remember about that, at the very bottom where the stinger was on the yellow jacket, after we'd had all the wording encouraging people to make a gift, at the end of the stinger, it just had a little note that said, "Get the point."
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
I will just note for the record that I did interview James Henry, one of my earlier interviews, and but he didn't tell that story about some of the challenges of mailings. But that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, good. Let's see. I was interested in your work with what used to be called the Old Grads, and now is called the Boynton Society, and it's just one of the great traditions at Randolph-Macon, I think. Can you talk about that, just for the record, let people know what the Boynton Society is and your work with them?
Sure. We had the organization for a number of years, but we formalized it basically in 1979 and put together a constitution, if you will. And it's very simple, but it basically indicates that anyone who belongs to a class that graduated 50 or more years ago is a member. It's not that you had to graduate, because especially for the early years of the Boynton Society, we were having people who were in the 20s, the 30s, Depression time, World War II, the 40s, And so many of them were not able to come back after the war
Sure.
or get enough money to then come back and finish if it had been Depression era. So it was something that we just thought this would be a very important thing to have to have an actual group. And we started out small, but still doing the reunion over the commencement weekend as opposed to homecoming, because there's so much that takes place during homecoming. There's not enough time to really focus on this particular group of people. And it was well received. Senator Hugh Scott, class of 19, was the second president of the Boyton Society. And I will divert just a little bit for one short story about the senator and my husband Mike, because we at that time didn't have all the facilities on campus, so we were using the Hanover Country Club to have some of the banquets. And on one particular evening, we had a huge downpour. I mean, it was just coming down cats and dogs. And we were coming back from the party, and it just happened that Senator Scott was in front of us, and he was driving a very large car. And when he got to the railroad tracks, that area had flooded, and his engine flooded, and his car died just before getting up onto the railroad tracks. So my husband got out of the car in the pouring down rain and pushed Senator Scott's car off to the side, exactly, so that we could then get him some help, mechanical help for the car. My husband's suit was probably not used very many times after that. The shoes were almost a total loss because of having been in so much water. But it was especially fun because the next day, Mike said he didn't want the senator to know who had helped him. And so the next day at breakfast, I was talking with Senator Scott, and he mentioned that this wonderful Randolph-Macon student had helped push his car, out of the flooded area and away from the railroad tracks. I mean, he was just so pleased with it, and we never, disabused him of his recollection of the
So
evening.
he thought the Randolph-Macon students went around wearing suits and that, right?
Yes.
Oh well, he's allowed that, I suppose. Well, I know that flooding was in the 70s, especially, such a big problem on campus in general.
It was. At that time, again, my office was on the second floor of Peel Hall. And when we had heavy rains, the word went out because flooding on Henry Street went up very quickly. And most of us parked on Henry Street. In fact, we did not have anywhere near the number of cars on campus, so it was easy to just park anywhere on Henry Street. And the cry would go out, move your cars, and we would move our cars. And then after we'd moved our cars, the next thing you'd see floating down Henry Street were rafts or canoes or floats, because the students were having a wonderful time on Henry Street. I think there are still some pictures somewhere of that. But, that was one of the fun things being in Peel Hall.
Yeah, that was a real problem on campus. And I interviewed President Liddell Payne, and he talked about trying to fundraise for the stormwater and how difficult it is to fundraise for infrastructure like that. That's not, it's not a building or a scholarship or something you really want to give money to. And he had talking about having to roll in that into other things so that they could really get that under control, because
it was
a problem.
Amazing because we were able to see the construction as they were doing that with the huge culverts, the concrete culverts that they were bringing in. And it's interesting because I remember they had to cut a diagonal across Blackwell. As you face Blackwell, left-hand side, they cut a huge diagonal, and under there, that's where they've got all those big conduits.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing process to work on that flooding. But it worked.
Right, and that was so important.
It was.
Yeah, especially now you think about the number of cars and traffic, just exponentially has increased. So that was good. Well, I love that story about Hugh Scott. That's great. So, I also just say I think that the Boyton Society being recognized at graduation is so moving, and I think really wonderful for the graduates to turn and look at the people who were in classes 50 years, it gives them a vision of how to stay connected with Randolph-Macon for 50 years. I think it's really brilliant, and it's very moving.
Well, we've been very fortunate with the administrations that have thought that was of value to have them there, and when they are asked to stand and are recognized, it means a great deal to them. And one of the things that has pretty much gone unsaid, but that group of alumni, which is just this past year topped 1,000 members in the entire alumni body, and they regularly for the last few years, hopefully it will continue, have given over 60% of the funding to Randolph-Macon that has come from the entire alumni body.
Wow.
It's a very important group of people for a lot of different reasons. Fundraising obviously is very important, but also the memories that they share, the camaraderie when they come back. We learn so much from them.
Well, this is something I was thinking about, and this might be a good time to bring it up. You mentioned, Senator Hugh Scott, class of 1919, and I was looking in the Randolph-Macon Bulletin of the year you started in 1974, and I saw Ambassador J. Reeves Childs, class of 1912. So I was just thinking, when you came in the 70s, looking back for the old grads, the reach of your the span of alumni that you have dealt with is amazing, because if you think you were reaching back to alumni from 1912 and 1919 and interacting with them in a significant way, and now we've having classes graduate 18, 19, our current students 20 and 21. That's 100-year span of Randolph-Macon students. So, I think that is amazing, and I wondered if you wanted to reflect on that at all. Or is it too scary to think about?
Let's just say the time has flown. No, but it's been a wonderful opportunity to meet and get to know the living history, the people of Randolph-Macon. And in some instances, things have changed. Obviously technology and so forth has done so much. So that the types of classes that are offered are very different from what they had been in the early 1900s. But there's that close connection that the students have with the faculty and then with each other, which continues when they're alumni. And that is just a real blessing for Randolph-Macon College to have. There are a lot of schools that don't have anywhere near that type of closeness, and the one way that many people will look at it as far as statistically is the type of support that is given, not necessarily the dollars, because big universities and so forth can do more, but the percentage of our alumni, again, who want to support this institution so that future generations have that opportunity that they had, that means more than anything. It really does. They're passionate about this college.
And the last few years, our alumni giving has really told that story. Just if you look at the numbers, compared to even, flagship universities, and our percentage has been in the top of the nation. So I think that really speaks well of the work that, it speaks well of this community, the college, but also it acknowledges the work that you and the development office have done too to reach out.
It is definitely a team effort. And we have a great person right now in Diane Louder as the head of the department.
Well, great. Well, on that note, can you tell us a little bit about the people at the college who've been important to you through the years?
I will always be grateful to Luther White and Henry Carter for having hired me. It was a pleasure working with Liddell Payne. He brought many gifts to Randolph-Macon, as did his wife Jean, who worked for the college for a period of time. Rusty Martin was a person who helped us greatly as far as alumni relations, because we had had what were known as tailgates, and no one was really responsible for them. And they had deteriorated over the years and were nowhere near what they are like now, which is marvelous, and Ellen Stack is to be commended for what she's doing with them and the design and so forth. But one of the things that I was hearing from alumni was that they really did want to be able to have tailgates revived. And so President Martin agreed to walk the campus with me. And we went and looked at the parking lot by the physical plant. Because at that point, there was no consideration being given to having the tailgate back close to where the football field was. And he agreed that we could hold it there. And we had some people like John Werner, John Clements, and some others who were on the committee that we formed in order to discuss how are we going to bring tailgating back and have it a really good experience for everybody. And that group did put together an outline of what we could do, how we could set up, and so forth. And so for 2 years, we had the tailgates down there in that area. And it was nice. The alumni appreciated being able to have it back, but they really wanted to be close to the football field. So after 2 years, I asked President Martin if he would consider moving the tailgate closer to the football field. And he said he would be willing to consider that. And so we went down to the parking lot there by the physical plant, and we looked at that area, and then we slowly walked up toward the football field. And as we were passing the football field, he mentioned the possibility of having it in the parking lot that is between Crenshaw and the dorm, which would not be visible to the football field. And we talked about that, and then we came to the parking lot at the north end of the field, west side of the field, and we talked some more about the proximity to the football field, and he agreed that with certain things in place that we could go ahead and move it from down at the physical plant and move it up there. And the alumni were very appreciative. We had a good team on the alumni board that helped provide leadership roles as to how we registered people and making sure that people were having a fun party time. This was not something that descended into something else. And from that point on, we were able to continue.
It's
So,
a huge event now, like
It
you
is.
say.
It is.
The
It's
current,
wonderful.
It's just a lot of fun.
It is.
Well, very good. Let me see. Well, so when you began working in the development office in 1974, the college had just recently gone co-ed in the fall of 1971. So that you didn't live through that change, the watershed event, as they put it, but you have seen a change in the alumni.
Oh, yes.
Because going from, and we still, when we look at the Boynton Society, we haven't reached that watershed moment in the Boynton Society because we're still in the 1960s for the Boytons.
Well, but we do have a few women
We do.
that are
Yes, talk
in
about that.
there.
Yes.
Okay. The first ones who were inducted were in the class of 1932, and they were townsladies. And we made, as I say, a big fuss over them. They had corsages throughout the weekend, but they thoroughly enjoyed it. And then in 1945, Eloise Piccolo, who lives locally, graduated, and she actually became a member of the executive committee of what had been known as the Old Grads and then became known as it is now as the Boynton Society. She became president, went through the chairs, and became president. And she is still a member of the executive committee of the
That's wonderful.
Boytons. Yeah, it is.
But then moving forward to after the 1970s, when the alumni, have you? I guess that just as women became part of the student body, it's just natural that we become active in the Alumni Association. So.
And the first female president of the Society of Alumni was Pat Hamback, class of 75, who went on to become a trustee of Randolph-Macon, and is still a very loyal alumna, staying engaged with the college.
Well, that's appropriate. She was in the first graduating class of 4-year women of the residential
And
cohort.
Donna Klepper is another one,
okay.
Who was from that very early period and who became a president of the Society of Alumni and is also exceedingly active.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, good. Well, what has remained constant among you're looking back over the RMC alumni and college relations, among the alumni, what do you think are some of the constants, characteristics, and what do you see as the biggest changes in alumni over the years?
I think the biggest constant has been the faculty who have instilled a real desire for learning with the students, and the staff that supports them in so many ways. It's also been interesting to see some of the changes in how communication takes place with people, because with the advent of the internet and so forth, many of the faculty and former students are staying in touch that way. So it's it eases the way for people to stay in touch with each other. And a lot of the alumni do come back for various big events, but much of the time they spend also visiting with the former faculty, either here on campus or if they are retired faculty, meeting the faculty in their homes or taking them out for dinner, that sort of thing, which has been a very good thing to see. As far as changes, we have a much more diverse student body, which is a wonderful thing to have. And I think that has added to the sort of side education outside of the classroom for our students, whether they are foreign students or students from different states, whatever the background is. It's a great learning opportunity. And it's also good for the faculty. I'm sure that has enlivened a lot of conversations in the classroom, as it should.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think you came maybe with a few stories that you would like to share. I want to just give you a chance to, if you had any particular anecdotes that come to mind.
There are a few. One of them was back in 2003 when Hurricane Isabel came through, and it decimated parts of the campus. Trees were down everywhere. There's a photo in Dr. Scanlon's history that shows an oak tree that is leaning. It didn't fall, couldn't go that far, but it's leaning into Rodine House, which is where we worked. And Doug Dalton, who has served on the Board of Trustees, as has his wife, as a chair, Beverly, was very helpful in getting some equipment to help the campus clear some of the stuff, because, there were wires down, there were trees down. It was like a disaster. It hit the campus. So that was one major memory. I also remember Tom Dwyer, who is still head of physical plant and doing a great job with it, his calm composure as he walked the campus to look at all the devastation and thinking about all the different things that needed to be done, in what order they needed to be done, but just very calm, and you knew we were in good hands, that somehow physical plant would get us back up on our feet again. So that was one. I also remember in 2002 when the Beltway snipers were in Ashland, and a man was shot, not killed, but shot at the Ponderosa. And that was a very scary time because when you were out on campus, you literally were not walking in a straight line. You would walk zigzag, and you would walk quickly to where it was you needed to go, because we didn't know if they were still here or where they were. So that was certainly a chilling one. I also remember on 9/11, the one Randolph-Macon alumnus who died in the World Trade Center. That was Barry Glick. He was class of 68. He was in the stairwell coming down when the building collapsed. To our knowledge, he is the only alumnus who died on 9/11. But that also is a key memory. I remember when we used to do dinner dances for the Boys in Society in Alumni Gym, and we decorated the gym the way it was done when they were students. And it would take us about a day to physical plants strung the wire across the ceiling. But then for us to toss the crepe paper rolls in order to make the fake draped ceiling like they had. And of course, it was done in yellow and black. And we had the Kings of Swing, who were the orchestra for the evenings. And we just had this big dinner dance party. And one particular year, as my husband and I, Mike, were dancing on the floor with everybody else, a campus safety officer came and tapped my shoulder and said, "I need to speak with you." So Mike and I went over to one side with him, and he said, "We've had a major flooding incident in one of the new dorms." And that's where the alumni were staying, because they could stay on campus at that time. And so we quickly got the word out to everybody that was in that particular dorm that we needed to go over and move their things from the first floor to the second floor.
Oh my goodness. And these are the old grads. I mean,
yes,
yes, right.
Exactly. But everybody was great about it. Nothing got ruined. There may have been a few slippers that may have gotten a little soggy, but everybody was absolutely great. But it was the last thing I was expecting to have happened during that particular weekend.
Well, maybe you got some donations coming in to help with the flooding after that.
Possibly.
Goodness.
Another thing that I remember early on in 1979 was Doug Dalton's special support for us. We were at a point where we did not have, we were in between heads of the department, and there were 8 of us, and we felt it would be very important for us to go off campus and have a couple-day retreat where we could really sort of gather ourselves and figure out, until we get ahead, who and what needs to be, who needs to do what, and overall what is our game plan for the coming year. And so Doug provided $1,000 for us to have an off-campus retreat, and it was amazing what came out of that effort, and it was extremely helpful, and we were able to implement a number of things, and I can't say enough about his, in a number of different ways. Both he and Beverly have been so helpful over the years, but this in particular made a big impact on us at that very early time, to be able to keep things moving in the area of advancement.
Very good. That was a very creative idea of whoever thought of that. And who led it? Was it led in-house as well?
The 8 of us sort of co-led it. And we went up to Mountain Lake to get off campus. That was one of the things that just have a different atmosphere. And it was extremely helpful.
Good. So you mentioned when you came in that you had some vignettes or stories you wanted to share.
Yes, there's one that stands out in my mind. The class of 29 was the first 50th class that I worked with, and it took place in 1979. And one of the things that I remember was that there was a gentleman, his name was Ira Hull, in the class of 29, who lived in the mountains of West Virginia. And he was a very short in stature man and very quiet. He'd been a school teacher. He wanted to come back for his 50th reunion. And he got on a bus and it was about a 10-hour bus trip
Oh, goodness.
to make it to Ashland in order to participate in the 50th reunion. He spent much of his time just watching people, listening to people, but he was not at all an extrovert. And my husband and I tried to sort of stay with him and encourage him to participate in certain things and talk with him. And we provided transportation. Actually, it was Mike who took him down to the bus station in Richmond and picked him up whenever he would arrive, because he came back for several of the reunions. But it was a situation where I visited him one time on his little farm in West Virginia. Drove way back and then had to hike. It was in the snow because the car wouldn't make it through the snow. And I hiked down to his little log cabin. And he used a potbelly stove to cook on. And we had a wonderful conversation. He had prepared fresh cornbread and some beans for me to have with him. And it was a very special time. And then I hiked back up to where my car was parked and came on back to Virginia from that trip. Ira made the bus trip several years, and Mike went in to pick him up at the bus station, bring him out, and then at the end of the reunion weekend, Mike would drive him back down, and he'd get on the bus and go back to West Virginia. When Mr. Hall died, he left his entire estate to Randolph-Macon.
Oh, my goodness.
And it meant a great deal that he would think of the college in that way. So that's one of many very special memories.
Well,
of being here.
that's a lovely story, and that you stayed connected, and as to go and visit him and make sure that he could come here to events. That's really lovely.
Well, that's what we are all about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, what's been your favorite part of your job?
The people. Definitely, because each of us is different in so many different ways, and it has been an honor to meet so many of the alumni, and many of them in their homes, or when they've been here on campus, or just meeting halfway between wherever to get together at athletic events, at drama events. It's definitely the people, and it always will be.
Yeah, and that's such part of at your whole office and department and your position through all these years has been staying in touch and making those connections, and that's been wonderful to see how you've done that.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you about one person I mentioned earlier. I've been doing a little research on my own research on J. Reeves Childs because he was such a fabulous benefactor to the library, specifically to the college in general, but specifically to the library. He's been he was very generous. And I wondered, did you know him at all? Or I know he was definitely older by the time you started, but I was just wondering if you had any memories, or because he spent quite a bit of time on campus in his later years, I know.
He did. I did not have a lot of interaction with him, but I do have one sweet memory of him with Dr. Moreland. They always enjoyed having conversations in the library.
Yeah.
And they would sit on a particular sofa and exchange stories and whatnot. And I remember one time coming in the library and seeing the two of them on the sofa, and they were both sound asleep.
Oh.
It was just a very precious vision of the two of them. Their lives were so remarkable. They'd done so much and seen so much happen, both on campus and in the world. And it's just a very sweet memory that I have of the two of them.
They were that comfortable with each other too. They probably had a nice conversation, and the conversation had waned a bit, and the next thing you know, they were just dozing.
And we must remember, too, that at that time the library did not have air conditioning.
Right. It was a warm afternoon.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a lovely, lovely memory. Well, do you have any other final thoughts or memories that you'd like to share?
I think we've pretty well covered the
We
waterfront.
covered it. Good.
But it has been a real honor to be part of the team here at Randolph-Macon and to meet so many wonderful people. And they have been so very accepting of Mike and me over the years, which I've deeply appreciated.
Well, best wishes to you and your husband on your retirement.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in today.
You're most welcome. Thank you.